but I think it was more so just me not wanting anyone to see that part of me, that nervous part or that imperfect part. So I really do think perfectionism and this go hand in hand.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Blushing Phoenix. I'm April, and I help people move past their redness and into living their best life. Today's interview is with Dr. Julie Groveman, who is a psychologist who has dealt with and deals with blushing herself. In her past, she did deal with erythrophobia. She has moved through the negative impact that flushing can have on your life and into living her best life. And I'm so excited for you to hear from her today. I think this may be one of those interviews that you listen to multiple times. I know I will. So without further ado, Dr. Julie. Hi.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to meet you.
It's so good to meet you. It's so neat to meet people online and then you actually get to meet them virtually. It's the coolest thing to me. So thank you for being willing to do this.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I've got a few questions here for you today. And one of the ways I like to set these up is obviously I'm already recording because a lot of times we'll be chit-chatting at the beginning and I don't record. And there's so many good things that get said at the beginning that I'm like, I wish I would have put that in there. And I do like for people to see it be very genuine and conversational and not so much, scripted or the whole point of the Blushing Phoenix mission is to be real and to show this is us and real people doing real things have this same thing going on or have worked through this condition and that they get to see what it looks like on different people or how different people have dealt with it, or some people who don't even deal with it at all, but have some information regarding it. So I think you are incredibly interesting. You're like a unicorn because you actually deal with it. You have it, you've worked through it, and you're a psychologist on top of that, which is incredible. I think that's incredible. So what I will do is I'll ask some questions and I've kind of based them off of the Instagram live that you did where you shared about your story. I kind of studied that a little bit and took pieces out of that to have you elaborate. And plus some people who are on this channel haven't seen that. And it's so, what you said on there, even though you said it went a little longer than you expected, I could listen to it every single day just to like, okay, there we go. I got it. Let's go. Because I felt so empowered after hearing it. And because of your education and your psychological knowledge, you're able to actually give tips and information to help people move through it. And you understand it because you've been through it yourself and you still have that. You're just still living your life regardless. And that's the big thing. And the mission of Blushing Phoenix is to show you're more than redness and helping people assign new meaning to what they think about themselves because of the fact that they blush. So with that said, I'm going to jump into, if you would just tell us, for everybody who's listening, this is Dr. Julie Groveman, who is a psychologist who also has had her own season with skin flushing and working through that psychologically. And Dr. Julie, if you'll just tell us a little bit about your experience. I know from that live that you did, it started happening when you were younger, maybe ninth grade, I believe you said, during a presentation. Can you walk us through when you first noticed that this was happening?
Sure. So the first time, actually, I don't even know if I got so red when the first time I was so anxious during that ninth grade presentation in my French class. I felt very just very anxious, unprepared. My mind went blank. I felt so self-conscious and just, I was already a very sensitive kid. And I think I just, I froze. And then that experience ever since then, I don't know if I got red that day, but ever since then in similar situations where I felt like all eyes were on me or, taking photos at a prom or eating with a boyfriend where I felt like he was watching me eat or just being watched doing things or having to go around in a circle in class, having to introduce myself or say something or, randomly sometimes at parties. All these situations were times where if I ever felt that I was getting hot, that was the trigger that oh no, something's wrong. And I either needed to go get fresh air, or I could just feel just all the redness going up my chest. And literally, I felt it. I know it was happening. And the idea of it was what kept it so alive and strong. Is just thinking about it would make it harder for me to just be present, to be focused on what was happening in the moment. So I would say it happened all the time, and it still happens. It just doesn't have the same effect on me now.
Yeah, I think that's because I know that you said, I think before that, you were very outspoken. You were kind of didn't think much about anything. You just were very out there, outspoken. I was very similar. And I didn't start experiencing the chest and neck flushing until I was in my 20s. And I think it just came after some just crazy season where my adrenals were taxed all the time, a lot of anxiety, like hearing some of your anxiety story. Mine was very similar with general anxiety disorder. And I was in this like health anxiety of I'm dying every single day for a year straight, where I just, every little thing felt like I'm going to die. I have a pain in my side. That's a tumor. You know, it was like very hypochondriac, and it just came out of nowhere, I say, but it really was in that part of my life where you're transitioning out of, I'm not a kid anymore. I've left a lot of old things behind. I hear you talk about being very intuitive and sensitive about a lot of things too, and empathic. So am I. And I found a common thread with a lot of people who do flush or blush chronically. A lot of times they are very sensitive and empathic. They have these giftings, which I find very interesting. Did you have, when you started having your flushing experiences when you were younger, did you have people point it out and call attention to it? You did.
Yeah. I mean, I never was made fun of for it. No one ever even judged me for it. But when you're that sensitive, even just anyone commenting on your appearance, I know I was self-conscious and stuck in that perfectionism, always wanted to look good or look a certain way. And if I had all these, like huge hives, it kind of looked like
Right.
hives all over my neck, all over my face. If that happened, again, I never had anyone judge me or bully me about it, but just noticing it made me notice it more. And just saying like something like, are you okay? Or are you having an allergic reaction? That kind of thing. But I think it was more so just me not wanting anyone to see that part of me, that nervous part or that imperfect part. So I really do think perfectionism and this go hand in hand.
Yeah, I noticed that you said that in your live about perfection, and I was like, that's me. It's an imagery and not wanting to be seen as weak. And I think for me, coming from the corporate world, you have to look and be a certain way. And if you get into that outlet and you don't look the part or act the part or don't look strong, especially as a woman, usually in a male dominated environment, you're trying to, be there with them and not show any signs of weakness, which is kind of how my brain was formed coming into corporate young in life or early in life. But I think that definitely from a perfectionist standpoint, when you pointed that out, I'm like, I don't think I've ever even thought about that before, that it comes from also trying to hold on to perfectionism. And this just jacks up our plans about looking and being aesthetically put together and strong and confident. You said that teachers would say to you too, you should be more confident. You're just always so nervous. So you had been dealing with the flushing for a while, and then you talked to your mom about it. Was that still when you were younger?
Yeah, it happened. So I didn't directly talk about flushing to my mom. It was more so the anxiety. I really do think the flushing is a anxiety response. I don't think it's just, it's I do think it's an anxious response. And I think that even when I know I'm jumping around a little bit,
No,
but
that's fine.
even when I might get red when I didn't think I was anxious, I think deep down I am a bit anxious and I don't even realize it. And maybe it's just when I say anxious, like I want to connect with someone, or I feel like I'm not being understood, or I'm feeling a little emotional. So I think it is an emotional response for me. But going back to with my mom, I think when I went and talked to her about it, it was more so starting to interfere with my ability to do things. I was dreading giving a presentation, dreading. Socially, it didn't really impact me. I went everywhere. I have a lot of good friends at the time. It didn't impact me there, but in terms of school, I mean, just getting up in front of my class was so anxiety provoking. Even the idea of going to prom and having the photos taken, like anything in the future, I would anticipate so long before these kind of situations. It would just take up so much mental energy. And I got so frustrated. I really think it was in the idea of going to college, the idea of having to deal with this level of stress around similar situations. I don't even know if my mom said to me, you know, you don't want to have to deal with this anymore, or if I just knew it at the time. But I'm so glad I did, because I just I just faced it head on, and I put myself in situations that I hated being in, but I needed to be in it in order to really, you know, expose myself to the fear over and over and over again. And it did not get rid of it. And it didn't, you know, like I said, I still have a similar response even today. 15 years later, I still have a similar response, but at the same time, it doesn't cause me the same suffering and distress as it used to.
I think when you talk about normalizing it, when I see you on your lives or you've shared some with me and you say, look her here, you're going to see me flushing here. It doesn't even look bad to me. I hear you talk. I hear your message. And I see it because I'm always looking for that on other people, because I'm sensitive to it myself, that I'm like, are they turning red? And then I get excited when I see somebody else turning red, because it looks like, to me, I think it's showing me how the outside world is looking at me, which is so much more terrible in my mind. But I'm like, if I see somebody going red, I don't think, when I hear your message, I hear what you're saying. I'm not focused on, look at her neck, it's turning red. I'm focused on your message is so good and that you're doing it anyway. And that makes me feel like, yeah, I can keep doing this too. And maybe people aren't so focused, or they might see it and then they just carry on. They just listen back to the message. It's such a big deal, or it has been such a big deal to me. And I say that because through my own exposure therapy of creating Blushing Phoenix, of talking about it more, of, you know, terrified the first time I ever talked about it out loud, and then kept talking about it, the more you reinforce and realize I didn't die over that. I'm okay. Everything's okay. But I do see a lot of people that in support groups that I've seen, they're supposed to be support groups. But what I've seen on the internet inside of those support groups is really people asking, can anybody give any information on how to make this stop? And so they're constantly searching for some sort of cure to make it go away. And I think when they hear there's not one that I've found or heard of, and even ETS surgery is not always successful and actually can have some more damaging side effects for some people, than it does more harm than good. So one of the things we're trying to do is wrap people's head around acceptance and exposure. When I see those support groups, it's a lot of just talking about how terrible it is. And from your expertise of a psychologist, when we it's one thing to express and say and get it out, this is truly how it makes me feel, in our own timing. But also, what can be some of the damaging side effects of just staying in that loop of how terrible it is? And what would you say to somebody who's just, I guess, wanting to talk about how bad it is and how I can't move through it and I can't do anything, and this is such a hindrance to me, allowing them space for that, but also what would be next from that? Because when I see those support groups, I don't see anybody moving beyond just this is how terrible it is. Yes, it's terrible for me too. And then there's a relation of, you're not the only one who thinks it's terrible, but I don't see any forward progress in those situations. And when I've thought about creating support groups for myself, I'm like, I don't know how to give space for people to do that and then not be like, okay, let's go, let's keep moving, let's keep going. So from your expertise and from a psychologist standpoint, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's important to give space for the suffering and for empathizing and validating that this does suck. It is annoying. It is frustrating, all of that. It's not something you would ever choose to deal with. But at the same time, focusing too much on a problem is leads you only downward, like it's only going to be a dead end. The more you focus on something negative, it just makes you feel worse. And so I think a big piece is trying to find the lesson here. Like part of what you're doing is trying to find the lesson in what is this, what has it taught you about yourself? Reframing. Again, we can't push anyone to be in a different place than they're at. Sometimes we need to meet people where they're at, which is that, if you met me in high school, there wasn't one positive thing I could have thought of. This flushing, blushing, I didn't want it. I was sick of it and I was hiding it constantly. So I think the fact that people are actually talking about it, going to support groups, is wonderful. And I actually have led support groups for people with social anxiety, not specifically flushing or blushing, but there's a place for getting that support and being able to be around people who relate to you. But if you stay in that place, it doesn't lead you anywhere forward, like you said. So I think it's really important to reframe the role it plays in your life and to decide that this is no longer going to be this thing that defines you or that holds you back or that gets in the way of what you really want for yourself. And that's a choice. We can't tell anyone to do that. It has to be something they arrive at their own time. But I think part of like what we're doing is saying you can, have both. You can blush and still be successful. You can blush and still go date and do these things, even if you're nervous about it. Like the progress isn't getting rid of blushing. I think that's the difference, not measuring the blushing as a sign of your progress, because it happens, like I said, all the time for me still, but it doesn't mean the same thing. I'm not suffering the way I used to. So that's what we want to kind of look at.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. Like, because that was my story for the longest was, I think it might be this. Let me eliminate these things from my diet. And then I'm like, it's working. It's not working. And then it's like, I think it's this, let's do this. And then I'm like, I think it's actually working. And then I would flush and I'm like, it's not working. So it's like this constant up, down, because I was measuring the progress by whether I flushed or not. And I'm with you. I absolutely have gotten to a place where I believe it is emotionally driven, even when I feel like I don't know, this just came out of nowhere. I'm so comfortable right now. Somewhere on a subconscious level, there's some sort of anxiety going on. And that might be that I'm overwhelmed or I'm tired or whatever is happening inside of my body. I can't always put my finger on it. What would you say is the first step for somebody who has been suffering alone and silently, and they've been watching these videos or they've been checking out some things on Instagram, but they're still just kind of stuck in, I just can't tell anybody. I can't talk about it. What would you think would be their first step for them? I mean, obviously they're there listening, so that's a good sign. But what, from your profession, is a first step for somebody so that they don't feel like they have to go from just listening to doing presentations in front of hundreds of people?
Right. Well, definitely not. And I think I'm a rare situation where I'm someone who likes to I'm impatient with things and I just wanted to just jam it out and do what I needed to do. But that's not the norm, right? I don't think most people do that. So I would say that even admitting it to yourself, because if there's so much shame around this that like I would constantly wear cover up, I would constantly wear turtlenecks or things to hide this. And there's so much shame around it. So even just to acknowledge it to yourself and maybe journal and write, like have a dialogue with yourself about what's happening for you. What are your feelings? I do think there's no research behind this and there's nothing other than my own experience to say this, but I do think there's sometimes a disconnect between you knowing how you feel when you blush. Because like you said, you're not sure why sometimes it's happening. I'm not sure in the moment. I don't feel nervous or I'm not sure what's really triggering it. But I think there's sometimes a lack of emotional awareness. And so being able to track situations that trigger you and having a dialogue with yourself privately, journaling about the experiences. We just want you to not bottle this up. Whether you tell someone or just get it out on paper, it's better to just get it out than to just keep it to yourself. So I think that's a first step.
Absolutely. And I think from your story, and what I will do when I post this video or this interview, I am going to link that live that you did, because it gives your story, so well, it's just so well explained, and there's so many pieces inside of your story that I'm like, yes, that's me, that was me. And then you kind of give these really great insights as you're telling your own story. I'm similar to you. I'm very much, I don't like to suffer. So I'm like, just rip the Band-Aid off. And we have this, I don't know if this is an appropriate joke or not, but my husband are always like, if somebody ever had a gun at my head and they were trying to torture me, I'd be like, just pull the trigger already, because I'm either going to make a run for it or I'm going to get myself killed,
Right.
because it's the sitting in the waiting. If
Yes.
I ever had to do presentations and there's a, you may not get to everybody today, so then there's going to be tomorrow. It's that anticipation that you talked about in your video. So I'm like, I want to go first. I'll go first. So I'll just jump up there and do it first. But also what got me to do Blushing Phoenix and get into this space of just talking about it was because I was tired of sitting with it and tired of feeling it all the time. And I thought, the more I run from this, the worse it's going to get. It just reinforces that fear every time I hide. And so I just started talking, not in my personal life. I felt like a starting place for me was, let me just start talking to the internet and talk to anybody who would listen. But I did not want people in my personal life to know, because I felt like there was an extra layer of judgment for some reason if people knew who I was. And I've heard people say before that they get a lot of anxiety if they're out at like a store or the shop somewhere and someone they know catches them off guard and says, hey, good to see you. They get really locked up and a lot of anxiety, and they blush or they flush. But if they just are talking to strangers, they're fine. There's a lot of people that are fine because there's no connection there. And then there's other people, obviously, that even talking to a stranger can make them go red. But very similar to you, I'm very quick to rip the Band-Aid off. And I know from your own story, the first go around after talking to your mom about anxiety and going to therapy, you started doing a lot of exposure therapy. Is that correct? You started just getting out in front of everything, or what happened there?
I only did one session of therapy, like of CBT therapy. And at the time, I don't know if I was so open to the idea of therapy, but I knew that I needed to do exposures. And so I just wasn't any formal therapy. It was just going into the situation that I really was afraid of and doing it over and over again. So it was a supportive place. It was a community college public speaking course and introduction to public speaking. And it was just every week you'd have to give a presentation. Other things I've done similar to that is joining like Toastmasters and having to give a speech there, which I didn't really stay as committed to that. That was later in life when I was in graduate school. But the exposures, I think, temporarily helps me a lot. But anytime you take a break from something and you lose practice with it, just like anything, if you lose practice, it feels uncomfortable when you get back into it. So over time, it's been undone. I've had to, reconfront, even if I don't do a live as frequently. When I go on to do a live, I get super red, and it's just an automatic reaction. There's nothing that I can do about it. It just happens. So I think sometimes it's random, right? Sometimes we don't even know why this is happening, but like I said, not measuring progress based on whether I get red or not, but more that I'm still doing these things. I'm not shying away from it.
And with the anticipation, you talk about a lot about anxiety, and from your own story and just in your practice as well. When you talk about people experience a lot of anxiety, more so in the anticipation, can you tell a little bit about how anxiety works and how it feels like this big monstrous thing, but how that actually works in the body?
Sure. So it's like, I like to relate it to like a car alarm system. Like we all have this natural built-in alarm system that is meant to protect you from some type of threat outside of yourself. And we need it. It's adaptive. It keeps humans safe. If you were to be in danger, like if you could imagine if you're driving your car and the cops are, you see the cops right behind you, your heart's going to start beating fast, or, you're going to be in that fight or flight mode that something might be wrong. And so to protect you, your body's responding. So that's normal anxiety in a situation where, there's a trigger that would be probably anxiety provoking for anyone. When we talk about anxiety in this case, for people with social anxiety, fear of being judged, that kind of thing, which I think really overlaps with the blushing and the flushing. Your fight or flight response is super sensitive. Your alarm system is easily set off by any, these really unthreatening situations, but you're still reacting as if you're unsafe. And so you're, in a situation where you're around a lot of people, for me, I'll just use my example. So because I had that experience in ninth grade, when I was in front of a lot of people, blanked out and felt really embarrassed, when I'm in similar situations, or not even similar ones, but anything somewhat similar, sometimes it generalizes, I have that same response where, you have all those physical symptoms. My stomach starts feeling uneasy. I find it harder to breathe. My heart's beating fast. I feel really hot. All those symptoms that you're unsafe or that you're being threatened, when really in reality, if we look at you, you're in a safe place, like you're not being harmed. One other thing I think is really interesting is that with social anxiety, there's been research that shows that people are more sensitive. When you have social anxiety, you're more sensitive to facial cues. And so you might misinterpret someone who's just looking at you seriously. You might take it as you're being judged, when really they're just have a blank face. So in college, I was part of some research that the findings was that if you're socially anxious, sometimes you're paying more attention to those neutral cues and taking it negatively.
Oh, that is me all day. I had to teach myself not to like be a bobblehead when people are talking to me because I'm sensitive. So when I feel like people are just giving me a blank face, that it is negative. They're not hearing me. I'm not being understood. And then I start to like shut down, and I've had to work through that. And even on my side, when I would be giving an interview, like at work for someone to get a job, they would be talking. And instead of me holding space, a steady space for them, I would be, yeah, yeah, yeah. And to basically reinforce to them, I'm here with you, I see you. And then I realized that for some people, that's actually very distracting and it's interrupting their thought process. And then if you see yourself on video doing that, you're like, that's such a mess. It's so distracting. And then actually getting to a place where I had to realize how they interpret me is them. I'm actually just sitting here listening and I'm holding space for them. And so then I realized that's the same thing on the other end. Just because somebody is not validating and affirming my every word with their facial expression. But I worked with a lady who is a yoga instructor who does a lot of therapy as well. And she's talked to me about tapping therapy and different things with a Thai yoga massage. And we were talking about PTSD. And she said, you could have a trigger that is in body language or facial expression. And you don't even know that. And so it may be something that triggers you, especially when it's authoritative. That's something for me when it comes from like a boss or somebody in a space that is more authoritative. If I don't have that approval from them, I realized that was a huge trigger for me. But yeah, that's a huge one. The facial expressions, I think a lot of people don't give much attention to. I don't know where this just came from, but it truly was because they didn't feel accepted through a facial expression. That's so crazy. It's not crazy.
Right. And some people just aren't expressive. And some people, like I tend to, because I'm a therapist, I'm constantly nodding. I'm very expressive. My face is very expressive. So I know it makes me uncomfortable when people have no, emotion. And I actually think typically therapists are a little more blank, or that was how I was trained to be a little more blank. That's just not my style. So I know it doesn't feel good for me. So
right. I noticed that you said, and correct me if I get your story wrong, but you were talking about in order to become a psychologist, you had to go through therapy. And that's a really good time for anything that's holding you back or that you're struggling with to come out, that you had to do 45 hours with of therapy. And one of the things that the therapist or psychologist tried to help you understand or get you to was, what did turning red mean to you? And through your time in that therapy, what did you discover that the meaning that you had attached to it?
I thought I had a lot of perfectionism around appearance. And I think social anxiety and body image go hand in hand. And so the idea that I looked different, that whatever different meant, like not like myself, me getting so red, I didn't like the way it looked physically. I thought it looked weird. I thought it looked, it was, and like, it's silly to admit because it's very superficial, but at the same time, until I talked about it, it like held so much power over me until I just talked about it. And actually a very simple thing that she said helped me a lot. And I still think back to it. She said something like, women are allowed to look different days. I mean, like, women are allowed to show up with different looks. You know, who says you're supposed to always look the same? Or like, I felt this pressure to always look good or the same or whatever that meant. And that's just one piece of it. But basically, taking the pressure off of me that I don't need to look any sort of way. Where's this coming from? And anyone in my life who cares about me and is meant to be in my life, likely they've noticed that I get red already, because it's something that's been happening for years and years. And you know, I'm someone who have had boyfriends, I've had close friends, I've had you know, people in my life who noticed this, and it never really came up. You know, it didn't, for me, it really didn't hold me back from meaningful things for me, in the sense that I did it anyway, even with the suffering. And so realizing that, like I said, anyone who's meant to be in my life likely has noticed it, and they will stay around. It's not going to affect them. And I think the bigger piece is that, um, noticing it really was through doing the things, seeing myself get really red. I mentioned in the live that I love playing soccer, and I get so red playing soccer because I'm so hot. And um, I got very, very red over and over and over again. My whole life, I used to do that, but especially as an adult, I wanted to do it again. And it stopped bothering me as much. And I think that's kind of the key thing, is the more you do something, the less power it has over you. Your feelings about it are less intense.
Mm.
So it was really through talking about it, and then also doing the things that I was saying.
When I met with a publicist recently, and regarding my book that'll be coming out next year, he and I were talking about Blushing Phoenix as well, and how the two tie back together. And he said, you know, I didn't even know that was a thing. And we were talking about erythrophobia, you know, the word erythrophobia. And he said, how do you spell it? And we did the whole trying to pronounce it, and we were cracking up about it. I'm like, I just made up my own way of saying it. It's not really how I should say it. But he said, I never knew this was a thing. He goes, I mean, I turn red sometimes, and I just think, so what? And I said, yeah, that's the thing, is that especially fair-skinned people, they will turn red and they think, so what? They don't think anything about it. It's when the meaning gets assigned to it that it's a negative. Because I look back at pictures of me from years ago where I have on low-cut shirts, and I'm at a social event, and I try to like zoom in. This is back before we had really cool, you know, phones with great cameras on it. And I'm like, did I not flush back then? I guess I didn't think about it. But there are some pictures where I might have a little splotch or somewhere on me, but I didn't care. I didn't even think about it. It's when it became a thing or somebody pointed it out. And I think very similar to you, from a perfectionist side of body image, which I've never correlated those two before ever, is that somebody called it out in me. And so when they called it out, it brought that awareness to myself of something's wrong with me. And that's similar to my anxiety story, my general anxiety disorder story, is that when I went to a doctor, I had a cold and I had been sick for weeks, and I went into a doctor's office, and when the nurse took my blood pressure, she told me my blood pressure was high. Well, I was in my young 20s. I'd never been told anything was wrong with my health ever. And so she took a minute and checked again, and she said, your blood pressure is really high. Well, my response to that, and the meaning I gave it, was something is wrong with you. And that was my biggest fear that I never knew. My biggest fear in life up to that point was somebody seeing that something is wrong with me. And so her saying my blood pressure was high meant my performance did not do well at the doctor. It's like I have doctor anxiety, performance anxiety, going to the doctor, making sure I can check all the boxes, that there's perfection there. And so when I left out of the doctor's office, which it was just a cold, you know, she's like, it has to run its course. She didn't think much of it. She didn't tell me I was dying. She just told me, keep an eye on your blood pressure. So when I walked out of the doctor's office, I started having a panic attack. I'd never had a panic attack before. So now I'm having a panic attack in a parking lot, and I can't see anything, and I feel like I'm about to die. I'm having a heart attack is what it feels like. And then the cycle started of, now I'm fearing a panic attack, but didn't realize I'm fearing having another panic attack. So I'm constantly making myself have another panic attack. And that went on for 1 year until I finally realized what was happening, and was able to work my way out of it. And then ultimately did get some therapy around it. And still, that's where a lot of the health anxiety came from. It's where a lot of the flushing started happening after that. That was kind of my moment of, there's something wrong with me and everybody can see it, and it's been called out now. And when you've had people say to you, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you having an allergic reaction? That's been my responses for people doing that to me as well. It's not people making fun of me, especially in my 20s. It's more so people saying like, whoa, you just got really red. Look at April. She's really upset right now. Look at what just happened to her, because it's an intense conversation. Or people that are genuinely concerned saying, hey, are you okay? You just got really red all of a sudden. What is your response to that when people say that to you?
Sometimes I'll say, I think I might be allergic to something. I don't know. Because that's easy. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, because it's really your choice. Do you want to share this or not? Like, I give you a ton of credit because this is like your thing that you're coming out about and you're talking about, but I don't talk about it that much. I don't, I feel like it's a part of me, but it's not all of me. So I pick and choose who I want to talk about it with. Like and again, I love this movement of, we're coming out and saying, who the hell cares? Like, this is what's happening and we're going to talk about it. But when someone asks me, even people in my family or friends or people I'm very close with, that's kind of a boundary that I think every person needs to decide what they're comfortable with. Of, do you want to share? Do you not want to share? Do you feel comfortable? It's all up to you. It's whatever's best for you in that moment. And so for me, it helps to kind of deflect, because putting attention to it makes it harder for me in that moment. Like, focusing on it makes it harder. So I kind of just want, next stop.
Yeah. No, and I love that. I love that approach too, because, and my functional neurologist told me, you actually are having an allergic reaction to some degree in your body. When cortisol is released, there is some sort of allergic reaction that's happening that's, not life-threatening, but that is what it is. So it's true as well. But I love that, because sometimes there might be days, even though I'm a big advocate for let's bring awareness and support, sometimes you just don't want to talk about it. And one of my main struggles with the channel is constantly talking about it, because that's what the channel is. And I actually was just talking to my husband recently about some other things I want to start talking about in the near future, because one of my messages is that we are so much more than this. And yes, it's a place for resources and for people to come and find that space, because for me, for many years, I would look online and I couldn't find anything, or you might find a picture of it, but then there's no story of hope around it. Or, well, what happened to the person? Did they figure out what it was? Was it truly this scary medical condition? Like, what was it? And I've had so many people reach out and say, thank you so much for putting this information out here. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm glad that people have found the landing space to realize they're not alone. But also I struggle with, but now what? I don't want to just talk about flushing all the time. That's something that is keeping me in that space, is constantly talking about it. I want people to know they're more than that. So I love that that's your approach, of saying sometimes you just don't give a voice to it. You say, maybe I am having an allergic reaction, and you just move on. Because for me, as soon as it gets pointed out, it intensifies by
Exactly.
And if I start talking about it, even when I'm in a mood to say, let me share what this is, you'll see it just gets so much worse, because I'm still bringing attention to it, and it's my fear, and I'm talking about my fear with somebody else. And even if I've worked through it here, or I think I've worked through it here, my body's still doing, it keeps the score. It's still doing what it knows to do when there's attention on me not being perfect or aesthetically put together. So and I love hearing you say that too, because you are a person who has just jumped right into the face of it by doing exposures through presentations and, playing soccer, because you love to play soccer and let yourself get red, but also in that more intimate setting, if somebody says, hey, what's happening to you right now? Are you okay? To hear you say, sometimes I just say, maybe I'm allergic to something, and move on, because it's letting people know you don't always have to give a voice to it. If you don't want to, you can move on from it.
Exactly. I relate a lot to what you're saying. Yeah. I wonder for you, through talking about it, has that helped? I mean, part of why I wanted to do this today was I do think this is healing. Part of my healing is telling my story. And what's weird is even after doing that live, I think it made it worse the next couple days, the next lives I did. And even now I get more and more red. I'm noticing because I brought more, kind of like I brought it back. I kind of re-triggered myself by talking about these things, but I know it was important and it was important to do it. But I do wonder for you, the more you're talking about it, are you noticing that that's decreasing the frequency, increasing the frequency?
It has decreased. And I think it's because it makes me feel more in control of it because I started something with it. So that immediately reframed that it's not some negative thing. It's actually allowed me to meet people from all over the world because I have this situation going on. And at first where it was just so isolating and scary, now I'm a creative, so I got to create something and invite people into it. And that's a very positive thing. I'm meeting people from all over the world. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have met Dr. Tara and other people that if this wasn't going on, I wouldn't even have that Instagram. I wouldn't even be having these conversations. So I look at that as such a positive of who it's brought into my life. I have learned so much about YouTube and videography. I am not that kind of person right off. So putting myself to a project that I've been able to stick to, which I'm not usually I don't usually stick to things very long. I'm kind of jump around a lot. So that's made me feel really great about the project and putting myself out there with that. So it definitely has made it better. And I met with Russell Norris, who wrote the book Red Face last week. One of the things that he said is that the more he shares about it, the more free he feels. Basically, I'm summarizing what he said, but he feels better every time because he feels like one more person knows. One more person knows, and it's one less person he has to hide it from. But one of the things we talked about in the interview is that once you brought attention to it, and especially on his scale, because he did a book over it, and then he did a talk show. He was on a talk show and he talked about it. Is that then people expect it, so they're like watching you, waiting for it. And if he doesn't get all red, or he doesn't look like he's coming apart, they question, well, you don't look like you're having a hard time right now. And so they're trying to dissect it in a different way that almost makes you flush again, because now people are looking for it. But I did notice when I interviewed him, and I don't know if this was just that day or what, but one thing I did notice about him, he never drew attention to the fact that he was turning red. Whereas, I mean, I'm talking about the topic. So I will go, as you can see right now, this is happening. You know, we're talking about the topic. That makes me feel a little better, is to kind of point it out and say, if you can see it happening now. But it's usually in this environment that I'm doing that. And so people are like, oh, I see it. It's fine. But similar to you, friends and people that are really close to me, when I started opening up and talking about this with them, I was really, I could feel in the inside, I felt like a little kid sharing something that I've done wrong. And the more I would talk to people around me, like I talked to my mother-in-law recently, I talked to one of my best friends about a year ago about it. And I've been talking to more and more people in my personal circle about it. And I'm feeling stronger and more confident when I do talk about it. And the first thing they will say is, well, one of my really close friends said, I don't think I've ever even noticed that you turn red. I don't think I've ever paid attention. And the others have said, yeah, I've noticed it, but I didn't think anything about it. And I know you said your husband said something similar to you about that as well, from his perspective, right?
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't ever judge me about it. And I think he doesn't even question it. If I ever say to him, I'm getting red, do you notice? He's like, no, I don't notice anything. He'll always tell me he doesn't see it. And then there's something so calming about when someone doesn't care, someone's not looking, someone doesn't notice, the pressure's off. It's like, just like if you're in your room and you get red, who cares? No one's around. So it's that idea of being judged. I think that's at the central, that's like the core of it, being judged, being negatively evaluated, like you're under a microscope of some sort, and we're not, right? This is unrealistic, but I think that's what goes through your mind at the time.
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
you realize it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, my husband's very similar. He had heard me talk about it before in the past, but when I really started talking about it a couple of years ago, he didn't realize I was struggling with it. And I said, it's not every day. It's not every day. It depends on, I mean, I flush constantly, but it's not every single day that that my mind is overwhelmed with it. There are days where I'm like, I don't care, who cares? And then there are other days where I would just cry, and I would just feel so
Mhm.
small and like, why is this happening? And I could never really tell you what was the difference between the 2 days. It just, maybe it was sleep or diet or just me being a human. I don't know. Some days you feel
Sure.
better than others. But when you talk about reframing it from a negative, how could people go about reframing it? Like, what is your suggestion to people to start bringing some sort of different mindset to something that they have deemed so terrible and so awful that's going to hold them back for their rest of their life? So what does reframing mean, and how can people start that process?
Reframing is just changing your mindset, is changing the way you think about something, like that this is a part of you that doesn't need to be a negative, and everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and everyone has things about them that they want to change or possibly that they wish were different. And part of developing a more positive body image, which is kind of, it's funny because I'm leading a positive body image workshop this weekend for women, so I'm very in the mindset of positive body image right now because I'm preparing for it. So I'm going to kind of share a little bit about that. But anytime you reject a part of yourself that you can't control, or you really want to, this is part of body image because your flushing is a part of your body. It's a body function that you can't control. Anytime you fixate, obsess, want to change something that you cannot change, I mean, it leads to so much suffering. So that acceptance, really trying to learn how to, I'm not going to say minimize it in your life, but to reframe what it means to you. So what if you flush? So what if, the thing that has helped me is that it's not painful. I'm in no physical pain. There's no physical pain there. Sure, emotionally, it brings up the self-consciousness, but that's a different issue, right? I think that's a deeper issue that's really not about the blushing or the flushing. It's more about being okay with being imperfect and accepting yourself as a human being. So I think there's a lot of work that's a little deeper to help with the reframing that helps. It's less about the flushing and blushing. It's more about self-worth, self-confidence, and healing that part of yourself.
Ooh, that is so good. See, I hear you saying those things, and I'm like, I just feel it in my body, this sense of like, ooh, she's hitting on some things, because there's always this unraveling that we're doing, learning and unlearning and untangling and unweaving these things that we think, I think through most of our lives, we're like, no, I'm doing good in that one. I'm good with self-confidence. I would never look at myself and think that I struggle with body image, self-confidence, my worth, because those are not things I ever really struggled with. But when I think about flushing and my experience with that, and even still, I still have an emotional issue with it to a certain degree, especially if I'm applying for a job, or I'm in a situation where I want somebody to pick me over some other person because we're in, I don't know, like for coaching, if somebody's looking to add a couple of coaches to their staff. I want them to pick me. I don't want them to see that I flush, but I'm going to show up anyway, knowing and expecting. This is what Russell Norris said too in regards to blushing, is that I expect it when I get there. Instead of being disappointed when it shows up, I know it's going to happen because it's part of me. And if I'm coming into the room, it's coming with me. So I expect it to be there. And he's reframed his mind around, what does that mean when he gets there? So for me, still, because I never struggled with body image growing up. I wasn't one of the girls that was like, I'm fat or this. And I had friends who struggled with that, but I didn't. But this ties back to body image, and it perfectionism and being seen a certain way. So maybe it's not weight, which a lot of women kind of get stuck in that category of, it's our weight. I just had a baby 11 weeks ago, and I'm very forgiving and graceful of myself. Of, you just had a baby 11 weeks ago. You're not going to look the way you looked prior to being pregnant. And I know that, and I'm fine with that. And I'm really kind to myself. But when it comes to flushing or being seen with a very red neck, I'm immediately putting a story in somebody else's mind of what I think they are thinking about me, which then starts to tear my self-worth down and my self-confidence. And I've never put those two together. So it's been more of a focus on how can we stop turning red? What can we do about turning red? How can we show up even though we're going to turn red? Instead of looking at who am I regardless, which is what I've tried to reframe over the past couple of years is, but who are we regardless of this? Yes, we may be a group of people that turn red, but what else? Like similar to what our husbands are saying, like, yeah, I don't care. I don't see it. It doesn't matter. And then what else now? What are we having for dinner? You know, where
Exactly.
we're fixated on being so stuck on it. From your profession and some of the things that you help people with, because you've got a lot of things going on. You've got different programs I think that people can sign up for. And what, just if somebody was looking and listening to this and they have your information in the description box and they want to reach out to you, what are some of the things that you can offer people who are struggling with blushing and their self-worth and confidence in this?
Well, first, I was just sharing, I have a private practice, but I also have a women's membership that is really focusing on building confidence, building self-worth. It includes 2 workshops a month taught by me with skills on different areas. So the workshops we've had so far are on mindfulness, on managing negative thoughts and worry, on body image, building a more positive body image. So we have different workshops, and then you also have social support from women on a similar journey. And then I'm going to be launching a course, a little bit more intensive course on the same topic, really embodying confidence and amplifying self-worth. And that will include some more attention from me and with other women as well, really working with other women on these goals. And also, you know, with worksheets and really self-guided course. I also offer one-on-one therapy, and that you know, I have a specialization in treating anxiety, social fears, social anxiety, depression, self-esteem, body image, really trying to build self-worth and redefine it. And I specialize in working with women. So those are just some of the services I have. Also, I have a free self-esteem guide for anyone who just signs up on my website for my newsletter. You can get a free self-esteem guide on askdocjulie.com.
Awesome. And I will link all that below as well so people can find you. One of the things you said in your live was that progress is possible here and healing starts within yourself. So in closing of our conversation, people who found this video and heard our conversation today, and this moment right here is they're still clinging for something. What would you say to those people that are just really I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do at this point, and they are now hearing your words. What would you want to say to them?
For me, when I notice someone blushing, as someone who blushes, I like them. I instantly feel a connection. I instantly feel like, wow, they must be sensitive and compassionate, and I feel for them. I know what that's like. And when people see you blush or flush or get red, most of the time, my guess is they will feel more able to connect with you because you're imperfect. People don't connect well to perfection. It's unrealistic, right? So if you're able to know that this part of you could actually help you connect to others on a deeper level, that this part of you is nothing to be ashamed of, you don't need to hide it. And I think like we were just talking about, you might show up and instead of trying to push this part of you away and saying, don't feel this way, I hope this doesn't happen, kind of imagine it being like a friend on your shoulder, an annoying friend who's just always hanging around. You don't want them there, but they're there with you. So how can you kind of welcome them and kind of let them be with you on the journey rather than trying to push them away? So I would just say, if this is getting to the point where it's blocking you from something that you want and you are suffering, you don't need to suffer alone. You can talk to someone. And I do truly think therapy can help. It doesn't mean you need to be in therapy forever. And it doesn't mean that maybe, maybe it's just 1 or 2 sessions, but talking to someone really does help to break the shame around this. So, or talking to someone in your life about it if you felt comfortable.
This has been just a really healing conversation for me. Like I said, I think we're always growing and learning, and just because I've started something doesn't mean I'm any sort of expert in it. It's more of just my own life story and meeting people along the way, and realizing the more I've realized I'm not alone, the more confidence I have gained by knowing I'm not alone in this. There's a whole community of people, and a lot of them haven't even found this platform yet to know that we're all in it together. And then I look at people like you who are just going about their business. You are doing great things. You're helping people. You are a huge voice in the community, and you can stop for a minute and say, you know, I want to get more vulnerable with the people around me and say, here's something that I've struggled with in the past. And you've talked about it a couple of times, and then you moved on back to the things that you're working on and the things that you're passionate about. And I think that's a great example for people who just have gotten stuck, because the mind, I realized when I had general anxiety disorder, a big thing for me was the loops, the brain loops that happen. And I think just talking to a therapist was able to help me identify those loops and start to put new things in their places so that I could reposition where we were going in those brain loops, and realizing that I did have control over that thought and how to get that thought process switched for the most part, and which is empowering, and which is what you're doing. And a lot of the work that you're doing is to empower women that have all kinds of things that get in our heads that we a lot of times don't talk about. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got a lot going on your plate, but for you to stop in and do an interview is going to be huge for the people that hear this.
Oh, I'm so glad. It was a pleasure, April. I'm glad we got to chat, and I hope this helps someone. And I'm a resource. I'm available. If anyone wants to reach out to me, feel free.
Awesome. Well, I will put all your stuff in the link below, in the description box below. And Dr. Julie, thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. So there you have it. That was such an incredible conversation. I took so many notes from things that she said. I know when I listen to this video over and over again, it's going to be so encouraging to me. I will put all of Dr. Julie's information in the description box below, as well as the Instagram live that we talked about and referenced throughout the interview. I would highly encourage you that if you are struggling or you just need a little bit of extra help and coaching, then you should most definitely look into some of the things that Dr. Julie offers. I'm so grateful for women and men in the community who are out there doing things for others and helping others to live their best life. If this video was helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss these videos in the future. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. And you are so much more than redness. Until next time, see you in my next video.